Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a director from Oslo who shot a series of commercials that I'm going to analyze in a couple of future videos. But today we're going to be taking a look at one for Volkswagen that I find to be incredibly good. Before we jump into the analysis, I'm just going to play the commercial so you guys get a chance to see. Okay, so now that we've all seen the commercial, hopefully we're in consensus that it's a really good commercial and also something that's really unique and not typically done in the commercial world. But I want to talk a little bit about the director and the cinematographer that's pretty consistent on his projects, as well as the agency, in case you wanted to look into it yourself. So before we jump into the actual analysis, I want to pull up, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Niels Windfeldt. It's probably horribly butchered. I'm going to pull up his website and portfolio so that you guys can see some of the stills that he selected on this piece. And then also, if you are interested in going to the same website, seeing his work, seeing who he works with, you can do that as well. And like I said, we're going to be looking at a couple of other commercials he shot in later videos because I find his work to be very good. It was shot in 2020. With Niels Windfeldt as the director, cinematographer Tim Lorentzen. He's worked on a couple of some of his other projects, and when we start to jump into some of the other breakdowns I do of these other commercials, maybe I'll get into the technical details, like what camera they used, film stock. I'll see if I can figure that out. But the production company was Newland. It's separate from some of the other production companies they've worked for and the agencies they've worked for, but this one is Newland. And then same composer that he typically works with. His name is John Sigsworth. I hope I'm saying that right. If we want to jump over to an agency that he works with pretty frequently and is listed as a director for, it's called Apparent, based out of Oslo. And then if we go over to his section of the website, we see some of the work that he's done. We'll take a look at some of these in future videos. So he's partnered with a production company, agency. If you wanted to take a look at some of their other work, I'd highly recommend it because it's all very, very good. Let's quickly jump into taking a look at some of these images, opening up the false color, seeing what we can figure out about it in terms of composition, how they lit it, potentially figuring out how they lit it, and where they're exposing everything at. Once again, it's important to note this is post-grade, and this was all shot on film, so a lot of the characteristics of the film stock are going to be set in stone from the moment they picked that film stock. So this is image number 1, and the first thing that we're seeing is that it's very heavy on the grain, potentially 800 plus ASA. It's outdoors, it's soft light, probably a grid above where he's sitting that's positioned relatively close, or it's a really overcast day. Either way, really soft lighting, quite a bit of contrast falling off. Same thing as all these images we've seen, we're beginning to see that consistency of most of the image sitting near black. And then right where the focal point is, right where his hands are, bringing him up high enough, separating himself from that dark green of the foliage below him and the dark blue of his clothing. Sitting perfectly exposed, one stop above middle gray, which for lighter skin tones would be one stop above middle gray. And the costuming, the set, or the location they've chosen here really helps to sell that compositionally and to draw the eye to that because everything is darker in the background and then up to his hands, the brightest point. We're starting to see some consistencies in the costuming as they cut between these different shots. In order to make it not too disparate, you have dark green foliage in the background. And then when you cut to this, it's the same kind of visual imagery. Dark green in the background here with a light yellow shirt, which matches pretty closely to the book bag. So probably just helps build some consistency when you're cutting between these disparate shots. And then obviously the lighting is amazing. You have dark background, a dark gloomy exterior, and then a really soft overhead light just above her. You can actually see in the reflection of her eyes that big grid just above where she's looking up toward. And then we're continuing the visual motif of overhead, looking down at the person. If we're looking at the values, most of it is sitting in 4 to 5 stops below middle gray, real dark in the image, which really helps to pop his skin out right where it's the darkest, right where he's laying on that bed. Pretty soft light, potentially very close because of the fall off on his face, or just a lot of negative fill frame left, probably a lot of negative fill frame left. All right, and then if we cut on the false color here, we see that just through the set and through the way they've lit this, there's just a natural vignette leading right toward the middle. And then we see that she is silhouetted against that window pretty strongly. Those windows not quite peaking. We're not seeing any red or yellow in these, so probably 4.5 to 5 stops above middle gray. All right, and then if we jump over to this image, we see her skin naturally sitting about 2 stops above middle gray, potentially 2.5, which makes sense for her being fair skinned. But across cheek to cheek, you could say potentially 2 stops above middle gray, and then 2 to 3 stops below middle gray on the other side of the cheek. If you wanted to replicate this contrast ratio, that's how you might go about doing something like that. And then the lines in the background that are leading down into the rest of the hallway, I really like how they kind of converge right to where her head is, so that helps to draw that interest to her. These two are put right next to each other in the commercial. I think it's interesting how there's not too much visual continuity here. The fall off isn't that extreme on the side of her face, and the lighting is relatively neutral. You cut to this one, really gold lighting. The fall off is much more severe. A nice little silhouette, create that interest, drama, upstage lighting, and then a quick fall off. Same thing with this image. You got that golden glow. You've got the quick fall off. You're shooting on the shadow side into the shadows with the light upstage. And it's the same ratios. You got about 4 to 5 stops below middle gray in the shadows. And then the key light that's pushing upstage is about 2, 2.5, maybe 3 stops above middle gray. They're going really low shutter, tilting the camera, adding as much kinetic energy as possible, making this one car down this kind of converging lane in a highway appear as interesting as possible. And they're doing that by twisting the camera, slow shutter, really gritty, opening up. So everything they're doing is to add these elements that make it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more kinetic. Another brand shot, really nice. Same concept. They're shooting on the shadow side. If the sun were opposite where it is now, you just wouldn't have any of that depth that you're seeing here. And once again, it's that natural vignette because you're shooting on the shadow side. Your eye is drawn straight to the focal point, which is going to be that Volkswagen emblem and some of the lines on the front of the car that make up the design. All right, and then the last image we're looking at here, I really like how they've balanced the background. They probably set the background first to be about 2 stops, 2.5 stops above middle gray. And then if we look at the brightest point on her, it's the same value, about 2.5 stops above middle gray. So we're still seeing that consistency, which we've seen in some of the other breakdowns where the subject is the brightest point. And if not the brightest point, it's being silhouetted. If it's not being silhouetted, it is at least as bright as the background. But it's been pretty consistent that we haven't seen a background that's consistently brighter than the subject if it's not silhouetting the subject. So, and then also they're opening that iris up all the way and just letting everything fall out. I like how the bokeh almost swirls around her. So you're once again creating that natural vignette as they take that camera and shoot it up into the trees above them. They're looking for the spots that are darkest around the edges of the frame and then get drawn toward lighter parts. You can see that her hands are being silhouetted perfectly with that that opening of light behind her. So once again, as I mentioned, silhouetting these focal points that you're seeing. If it's going to be as bright as the subject, silhouette something. And then once again, shooting on the shadow side, just to create the shape around her face, make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And then the eye light from that little bulb really popping out her eyes as well, really helping to sell that. All right, that's going to be it for today. Pretty quick one, but I just wanted to introduce you guys to a series of these commercials, which I found very interesting, and they all happen to be branded work. So in the next episode, we're going to take a look at some of his other works. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.